Hello and welcome everyone to another episode of Stratabeat's B2B Marketing Tech Talks. Today I'm joined by Andres Echenique, who is the CEO of Perlu, which is an influencer marketing platform and network. We here at Stratabeat use Perlu. We love it. We endorse it. And we've been working with Andres for several years now. And so really very excited to have him here. He is a wealth of marketing knowledge. So welcome, Andres.
Thank you, Tom. Great to be here.
So Andres, can you start out just telling us a little bit about yourself and Perlu?
Sure. So Perlu is an online community that can be used by brands and influencers to connect with each other and ultimately grow in the sense of whatever it is they need. People usually think of brands and influencers as separate things. They're actually pretty similar. Brands and influencers really are brands. They're just smaller and perhaps more personal, but they all have the same need for growth. And so Perlu is a community that allows these two folks to connect with each other. And we provide a whole bunch of tools that let them team up and do projects that cause growth. And by projects, it's mostly in the social space, but there are a lot of other possibilities with Perlu.
Great. And as mentioned, Stratabeat uses Perlu and we love it. And later on in the discussion, we'll get into specific examples. But for now, Andres, could you tell us a little bit about Perlu's differentiation in the market?
So I want to start really from the brand perspective on this. The brand perspective on this is influencers are a hugely valuable marketing channel. But the challenge with working from a brand perspective, working with influencers is there's just too many of them. The space is enormous. And brands kind of get tangled up in trying to find exactly the right one. So what we do with Perlu is actually try to reduce that set to the ones that matter. And the way we do that is, it's a little indirect, so bear with me on a couple of, as I get through the story a bit. It turns out that influencers don't live in isolation. They travel in groups, they network with each other, they work on things together, and it's a natural part of their development as influencers for them to collaborate with other influencers. They'll share content, they'll work on things together, and that's kind of what happens out there in the real world. And what we said is, and quite frankly, we borrowed liberally from somebody else that does this really well, which is LinkedIn. What we said is, if we provide tools to influencers to help them do this better, and there's a whole bunch of pain points and friction in that process with existing tools, they will continue to come to Perlu and they'll do things on Perlu, and it will start to be obvious which of the influencers are the most active, which of them are slightly active, how they're working, what kinds of projects they're working on. And all of that provides brands with signals as to who they should work with. So rather than presenting a brand with a database of 5 million influencers, which is pretty easy to generate these days, what we do on Perlu is kind of what happens on LinkedIn for HR people and recruiters, which is they'll start looking around at profiles and see who's connected to who that has similar skills, and they'll start to understand what their track records are. And we do the same thing on Perlu. As people work together on Perlu, we start to accumulate reviews and different connections, and all of that provides a faster way for brands to find good candidates to work with and not have to sort through many to get to the ones that actually matter.
Great. And the types of collaborations that brands are doing or influencers are doing, that's transparent, right?
Yeah. So in Perlu, it's not like so many of our competitors, they have their platforms and they have their databases of influencers that go with them, and brands come in and they work with the database and try to find influencers. And Perlu is truly a community. So brands have profiles on Perlu as well as influencers, and everybody can look at everybody's profile, and like a true kind of community and social network, they can follow each other and start to understand what's going on and see all the connections that exist in this network and use those connections to find the right people, whether it's an influencer trying to find partners, other influencers to partner with, or whether it's a brand trying to find influencers to work with on campaigns on their behalf in the social space.
Yeah, and I know one of the ways that we use Perlu here, Stratabeat, is we'll organize different groups of influencers for different clients, for different purposes, for different campaigns. And so it really does help to be ultra precise in what we're trying to achieve to align with the right influencers.
Yeah. So another cool thing about this community approach is that, as I said, there's a natural trend of influencers to find people to work with so that they can advance their careers as influencers. And in Perlu, these influencers that have signed up and have created their profiles and whatnot, organize their collection of connections, their peers or their people that they're working with on projects in a public way using a facility we call packs. So what happens is if you're like a solo female traveler, and if you're in that space as an influencer, you'll pull together all your other colleagues in that space, also in that solo female traveler space, and put them together in a pack. And this pack of influencers now that this influencer has curated and has worked with is available as a thing that a brand can find when they have a need for not just one solo female traveler influencer, but a pack of them. And so in Perlu, what's happened is the thousands and thousands of members on Perlu have organized themselves into all these different groups. And so we have about 4,000 of these packs that go from kind of broad things like, moms that are interested in fashion down to the nichiest of niche things like small dogs of Instagram.
So Andres, can you give us a couple of examples of how brands have been executing campaigns or simply doing interesting things on Perlu?
Sure. So I have two examples. I'll talk to you quickly. On the B2B side, we work with a company called 8x8, which is a kind of a corporate infrastructure company, tech services things, so communications and internet, and a number of different tools. And we help them launch a video conferencing product. And one of the things that, this is a little bit indirect, but I'll come around to it. One of the things that on Perlu, when you need an influencer, it's very easy to find one on Perlu because they've organized themselves into these packs. If you can find a pack, you can find these people, and then you can communicate with them very easily, kind of in one click, and you can get some feedback from them. So that mechanism makes it very easy to get influencers' opinions about what you should do as a brand. And it's not always clear to brands these days what to do with influencers. There's many, many, many ways to use influencers. And so what's interesting about that is that influencers function as what we say is the voice of the crowd, right? So they have a whole bunch of followers. They have pretty close relationship with these followers. They understand what their audience wants and needs and what their opinions are, because they wouldn't be influencers if they didn't understand that, right?
Right.
And so asking those folks, influencers, about what the right thing to do as a brand is a super powerful thing to do, because they represent thousands or tens of thousands or millions of consumers or users of your products. So, but because we make getting to influencers so easy on Perlu, you can actually ask these people questions and say, what should we do? And they'll respond to you within hours and give you some ideas about what to do. So for 8x8, it was a little unclear for them being kind of mostly a corporate company about how they can sort of leak out a little bit from the corporate environment to small business and the Soho world with their product. And they knew that kind of influencers would be a gateway to that, but they didn't really know how to activate it. And so what we did was we pulled together a handful of influencers that are freelancers and traveling consultant types and a handful of others. We got them together in a focus group and got their opinions about how to launch this and kind of what the creative angles would be in terms of asking influencers to produce content on behalf of 8x8. So we did that in about 72 hours. And the next day, we had about 50 influencers starting to create content on behalf of 8x8 in the various spaces. And some of the angles were like, how do you this was kind of at the end of the calendar year. So how do you start your new year with resolutions about how to communicate better? Mm-hmm. We also talked about angles that were related to how do you stay in touch with your clients when you're traveling all the time? And the 8x8 conferencing solution is very, very simple, very, very easy to use, and that kind of fit well. And in about 3 weeks, we had about 1.5 million social impressions. There were about 50 influencers that produced over 100 pieces of unique content. So the campaign was a big success for that. So that's on the B2B side. On the B2C side, we just are kind of in the middle of a pretty interesting campaign for a Scotch brand. If you know your high-end Scotches, Brook Laddie, which is one of the brands out of Remy Cointreau, has a sub-brand called Octomore. And Octomore,
I like the name.
It's an interesting name. It's an interesting product. It is not for the faint of heart. Octomore is the most heavily peated Scotch. If you know your Scotch stuff, and I barely know Scotch stuff, I know enough to say that. Is one of the most heavily peated Scotches in the world, and it is a very, very complex flavor profile, and it's not for everybody. It's about a $350 or $400 bottle of Scotch. Oh. And every so often they change, they tweak the blend a little bit, and then it's a new product introduction. So they're introducing Octomore 11 this year, and so we've been helping them with this introduction of Octomore 11. And the concept that we are running with that was created by influencers. So we did the same thing. We pulled a bunch of Scotch influencers into a room. We had long conversations about how best to intersect with this world and what kind of creative approaches to follow. And they came up with a concept, which is, it's so complex. There's so many aspects to this. We really want sort of a tasting guide to it, and a way to sort of take consumers through all the goodness and complexity and be able to understand every note in the flavor profile and understand the genesis of how all these things came together and all that stuff. So we came with the concept of a tasting guide, almost like a user guide. And we decided to take these 8 influencers, and each one of them would sort of write a chapter in this guide. And so we sent them samples, and they tasted it, and then they produced long form content. So these are blog articles, actually. Okay. There were 8 of them. And the whole reading the whole guide caused you to go from influencer to influencer to influencers. They're all linked. And so it's a great way to basically say, here's 8 Scotch experts, and here's, all their nerdy, analysis of the Scotch.
I love that.
Why you should care about it. Yeah. And so that's phase 1. There's a kind of a cool side effect of this, which is that if you Google Octomore 11, 3 of the 5 chapters are on page 1 of the search results, which that's nice. So that kind of takes that space there. Yeah. But the second part of this is sort of a 2-phase campaign. Is we have about 100 influencers lined up behind this that are going to start to share this content, share their favorite chapter, basically, with their audiences. So we're looking at about a 5 million social impression campaign over this whole, over about a month and a half. So far, we're doing great. So those are kind of two good examples, I think, of what we're up to. And all of this is possible. Like, again, what ties these 2 campaigns together is that influencers are part of the planning process, and that allows brands to get to unique solutions that stand out in a world that's, and I think we'll talk about this maybe in a second, in a world that's crowded and complicated, and influencers are doing all kinds of stuff with all kinds of brands, and you have the same challenges you have everywhere else, which is how do you stand out?
Yeah, I love those examples. And personally here at Stratabeat, the way that we've used and interacted with Perlu, it's incredibly valuable whenever we can engage with influencers upfront, upstream in the process for brainstorming and ideation. Their ideas are just so creative. And I think that one of the reasons for that is because they're just so directly connected to the end audience. So it's really fantastic. So with that, I just want to change the topic for a second. Andres, can you tell us a little bit about National Influencer Day?
Sure. So this is just one of those ideas that came to us. It came to us, I wish it had come to us about 6 months ago, but it did not. But someone noticed that October 6th is the 10th anniversary of Instagram. And with some conversation about that, what kind of popped out, and I wish I could say, hey, influencers got us to this, but we didn't do that. But what popped out of it is, hey, there doesn't seem to be a National Influencer Day, and why don't we do that? And why don't we do that on October 6th, and just put a stake in the ground and claim it as ours. And as part of it, what will we do? We said, well, let's do some kind of online conference. In another era, of course, we would have probably had a real conference, but we decided to do an online conference. And a big part of the Perlu brand, and this ultimately benefits brands as well, our brand customers and clients, is that we have tools that we give to influencers to help them grow. And so a big part of our brand, and this is another differentiator, is that we not only do the things you would expect us to do to help brands do marketing in the influencer channel and in the social space, but we're also helping influencers do what they need to do to advance their careers, and sometimes that involves brands, and sometimes it involves just influencers working amongst themselves. So a big part of our brand is being true to helping influencers. So we focused this conference on influencers to market National Influencer Day, not because it's a great great thing to do for brands, but because it's a good thing to do for influencers to recognize that they have challenges, that they have needs, and it's a hugely underserved community. There really isn't anybody that sort of addresses the needs of influencers. So we put together a program, a panel discussion, and a couple of presenters that talked about the things that influencers need to understand to be kind of more brand ready, right? To understand what brands are looking for, to understand where they fit in the ecosystem and what they can do to be more valuable to brands. And what we see is a big opportunity for both brands and influencers, which is to really get serious about bringing influencers into the planning and design process. And so we sort of made the bold statement that here on the 10th anniversary of Instagram, we're entering a new era for influencers that's not about using influencers just as fancy banner ads, but really to use them as partners in advocating for your brand in many, many different and diverse ways that they're capable of, that are well aligned with their opinions and their knowledge of what their audiences want and need.
Yes, absolutely. That's great. And the day was a huge success, correct?
Yes, it was really good. The thing that was really different about it is we didn't charge influencers for it because, we're true to trying to put our money where our mouth is, which is just useful to influencers. But the second half of the day was we actually got a brand sponsor, the United Arab Emirates, who's involved in the Special Olympics cause, to sponsor a $5,000 prize for a hackathon. And what we did was sort of the first half of the conference was what you'd expect, some panel discussion and some speakers and knowledge exchange that way. But the second half was, hey, let's actually take the influencers that have attended this course, let's break them up into teams, and let's do a live real-time planning exercise with these influencers with $5,000 at stake to come up with the best way to promote the UAE's involvement in Special Olympics using the influencer channel. And so we did that, and we gave the influencers all of 20 minutes to come up with a plan. And I think you had said that will never work.
I thought 20 minutes was really pushing it.
But it worked like a charm, and some complete influencers, complete strangers to each other, were dumped into Zoom subrooms, and they did their thing, and they came out on the other side with some pretty great ideas. And so we're moving forward with some great ideas for the UAE on that, and the influencers afterwards all were saying, "Oh my gosh, that was so great! It was so intimate. I really got to exercise my creativity and make some new connections and all that." So it was a really interesting way to run this thing.
That's awesome, and kudos to you and your team for concepting it and putting it on and flawlessly executing it. So.
Thank you.
All right, final question for you. Looking into your crystal ball, what do you see happening in the coming year, 2 years? What types of changes do you see coming to influencer marketing?
Well, there doesn't seem to be any slowdown. Indeed, I think there's actually an acceleration of investment on the part of brands and influencers in this channel. The headwinds that the industry faces, of course, are dealing with, anyone can be an influencer. It doesn't necessarily mean they're really an influencer or even a good one, but when you talk about the sheer numbers and adoption across TikTok and Instagram and whatever else, the numbers are just enormous. So what we call in the industry the discovery process of trying to select for a brand to select influencers, the right influencers for a campaign, is very difficult. And by the way, there's always an easy way out, which is to find some celebrities that are influencers. But that is expensive and increasingly inauthentic because everyone's figured out that these folks just accept checks and will say whatever you want.
Totally agree with that.
But the smaller influencers have much more authentic relationships with their audiences, are far more discriminating about what brands they'll work with, because they have to, like any publisher, essentially, they have to keep their audiences happy or they lose them, right? So they've got to produce stuff that's in line with whatever their personal brand is and whatever their expertise is. And so they'll be selective about it. So unfortunately, brands can't just write a lot of checks to kind of brute force their way through it. It just won't work. The influencers won't cooperate with that. So the discovery process of trying to find exactly the right influencers at scale for your brand, I think, will continue to be a challenge, but it's also just an enormous opportunity, because if you find the right set of influencers, they will be your best friend and not just produce content on your behalf. And we see this when we find a good influencer for a campaign, they will typically get excited about the product, and they'll do more than they ask you for because it resonates with their audience and because they personally like it and it fits well. So when you get it right, it delivers in spades.
That's awesome.
But the other challenge is that for brands, they're not sure what to do, and the obvious thing to do is getting pretty tired. The obvious thing is the smiling millennial with the picture of the product on the beach, and just repeat. And the audiences of the influencers have gotten hip to that, and the influencers themselves are weary of that. And so brands have to come up with more interesting things, and that's where the influencers themselves come back in. And so what we think is going to be the big driver is the influencers being planning partners with brands to create campaigns that really stand out. And so that's going to be the big thing, I think, for the next couple of years. Hard to pull off, but it will be the key to success.
Yeah, fantastic. And so if someone watching us right now or listening to us right now is interested in learning more about Perlu, where should they go?
Sure, perlu.com. Pretty simple. We've got lots of forms there. We can do demos. We can talk you things. We have a services team called our Launch Studio, which will help you plan campaigns and execute campaigns, or you can self-serve on the platform for small fees.
Excellent. So everyone, please check out perlu.com. We use it. We love it. It's a fantastic platform. It's very unique. It's very different than anything that we see in the marketplace. And Andres, thank you so much for joining us today.
Great to talk to you, Tom. Thank you.
All right. Take care.
Bye.